started. Thank you for joining us for our live voting methods virtual open house to listen and interact with our panelists, ask questions, and provide feedback. As we begin, please take a moment to listen to and consider our territorial acknowledgement. As we gather, we are reminded that Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a city, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. Today, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples on whose traditional territory we are meeting. Tonight, we are joined by city staff and our panelists. Listening from the City of Guelph tonight and online, we have Jennifer Slater, the Manager of Information, Privacy and Elections and our Deputy City Clerk. We have Stephen O'Brien, the City Clerk, General Manager of the City of Guelph's Clerk's Office, and myself, Kelly Guthrie, Community Engagement Coordinator for the City of Guelph and your moderator for this evening. And we have our panelists, who we will introduce shortly. The purpose tonight is to provide people the ability to hear a variety of opinions about voting methods, so we can provide informed input. We will be talking to our panel about remote methods of voting in our municipal local elections and the pros and cons of each, so we can all get a better understanding of the opportunities and limitations of each method. This will help Council decide which methods will be used for the 2022 election. Council has a requirement to make this decision before May 1st, 2021, and we want to make sure that we have all our feedback in by then. Our hope tonight is to provide broad, neutral information about voting methods with all available options on the table for feedback, and to discuss voting methods with subject matter experts with different perspectives. We then ask that you provide feedback to us about the voting methods that the City of Guelph should use in the 2022 election. It is important for Council to understand what methods voters in Guelph want, what they are comfortable with, and what they can trust. We are providing a lot of information tonight, and we welcome your questions, but we would also like for you to provide feedback by taking our survey at haveyoursay.guelph.ca. There is more information that you can read there, and the survey is available for your input until December 4th. If you do have questions tonight, we will be taking questions throughout the evening using a tool called Mentimeter, as well as on our Facebook page. The Mentimeter tool does not require you to download anything. Just visit menti.com and type in the code 4757931. That's 4757931 to send us your questions. And on Facebook, if you're joining us on Facebook, simply ask your questions in the comment or chat section under the live stream. Our agenda and timeline for this session tonight, we will start off with a presentation from our City Clerk, who will provide some context, timelines, and an overview of this project. Then we will move into our panel discussion, which will take approximately 45 minutes. And for the remainder of the evening until about 8:15, give or take a few minutes, we'll focus on questions from our audience. So if you have questions for our panelists, please send them through Mentimeter or on Facebook. I'd like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded so that we can post the recording for those who aren't able to attend during the live event tonight. The recording will be available in a few days on guelph.ca/voting and at haveyoursay.guelph.ca in the Voting Methods project. I would also like to remind everyone that this is a place and an opportunity where different ideas, perspective, opinions, and values can come together. The more variety of thoughts in our discussion tonight, the better. There isn't a right or wrong way to do this. There are no right or wrong answers, and there are no right or wrong questions. Your questions are important and your insights are needed. It is important to understand that we can't share any disrespectful or rude comments or respond to them. So please keep your comments and questions respectful and kind this evening. Finally, a gentle reminder to everyone participating on our panel in the meeting to please mute your microphones when not in use, but when we want to hear from you, make sure to turn them back on. So please join me in welcoming Stephen O'Brien, our City Clerk, who will guide us through a short presentation before we join our panelists. But first, let's introduce him. Stephen O'Brien is the City Clerk at the City of Guelph and has been in this role for 6 years. He supported the delivery of the 2014 and the 2018 municipal and school board elections in Guelph. Prior to this, Stephen supported elections in the City of Richmond Hill in York Region. The City Clerk has a responsibility to serve as a returning officer and chief electoral officer in the administration and delivery of municipal and school board elections. Every Ontario municipality is required to appoint a municipal clerk, and each of those are statutory positions who share that responsibility for delivering elections in their local municipalities. The whole City Clerk's office team plays an important and impartial role in delivering election services to the community. And with that, that's Stephen O'Brien. I'd like to pass off to him.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Really happy to be here, happy to be joined by the panelists. I'm going to share the slide screen again so we can walk through a little bit of what Guelph residents who are joining us tonight can expect. So to start off, we're going to provide a little bit of context with respect to this topic. We'll outline some timelines. Kelly did highlight some of the timelines, but we'll highlight a bit more detail about those timelines. We'll also talk about the various voting method options we're reviewing and that would be before council for a decision in the early part of next year in 2021. We'll talk about how each of those things work from a very high level. We'll talk about benefits and drawbacks, generally speaking, and some anticipated costs. And then really it's why we're here, which is to answer any questions and listen to you, the community, that you may have. So please do connect in with us. We've got, who will be introduced very shortly, we've got a wonderful panel with us this evening. I'll echo what Kelly said. For those of you that may have just joined recently, you can go to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and use the code 4757931. You can add commentary and questions through Facebook if you've joined us there. And we really do look forward to a good discussion this evening. With that, we'll move along. So, voting methods. Really, why are we here? We wanted to talk a little bit about that, obviously. What do we mean by when we say this term? Voting methods really means how you cast your ballot. And we're talking about remote voting options here, and they can include vote by mail, vote by phone, or internet voting. Kelly introduced me, and I'm thankful for that. Who we are is our role in the City Clerk's office is to deliver local elections in Guelph. Municipal and school board elections, they happen every 4 years. Our last election event was in 2018. Our next one will be in just under 2 years from now, in October of 2022. And the question probably some of you may be asking is why a remote method is important. I think obviously in the context of 2020 and a global pandemic, that's obviously fair to say that having remote voting options for the electors in Guelph is something that will be of importance. I hope that we're through a global pandemic come October 2022, but it's certainly shone a light on the need for us to consider some of these things as well. It's also really important in a variety of other circumstances. For example, some individuals who own property but don't live in Guelph, those that might be out of town for work or on personal matters, someone who might be unable to come to a voting location due to limited mobility or health concerns like allergies. So remote voting options are part of our way of making voting easy, as we say. I want to talk a little bit about the scope and intent of the engagement. So the intent is to lay out all options and hear from the community on what remote voting options they prefer. What is in scope is what I've mentioned before: vote by mail, vote by phone, vote by internet. Out of scope is in-person voting locations with tabulators. That's something that still will be available in 2022. Or also things like home visit voting services. Those are the kind of things that can be considered by the City Clerk's office independent of a decision of council, and we will evaluate those services and those offerings as we get closer to Election Day. I'll move to talk a little bit about timelines. Engagement has began in this body of work beginning in November 9th. We're obviously here tonight on the 18th to host this open house and this panel discussion. On December 4th, this engagement window ends and the survey does close online. February 4th, we will have a report with recommendations to Council available on guelph.ca/agendas, and Council will meet to discuss this report on the 21st of February. The legislative deadline as it stands right now in this moment is May 1st, 2021. However, that date actually may change because there is legislation before the Ontario legislature that might move that date. That being said, city staff, the team in my department, we're eager to get this decision done early in 2021 because we have to obviously have ample time to plan, deliver, and think about all the various components that go into delivering a safe and accountable election. I'll talk a little bit about how each voting method works, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, not because it's not important, but because the information is available. So I'm going to direct everyone to haveyoursay.guelph.ca. Again, that's haveyoursay.guelph.ca. That's a place where you can download information and materials. In fact, the information that's on the screen right here is a sample of one of the documents we have online. Each voting method works a bit differently. Much of the differences are fairly intuitive, but there are nuances from a high level. For example, in a vote by mail situation, we would mail a ballot to an individual and they would request that potentially, and we would mail that ballot to them. They would fill it out and have to return it to us. So there's some logistical calculations there, logistical considerations about receiving ballots back in the mail and that type of thing. In vote by phone and vote by internet, there's still sort of that registration process, but the ballot is delivered almost instantaneously at that time. So again, I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time because we could talk quite a bit of time. And I think what's most important is for questions to come to our panelists and for them to dialogue on it. Again, most importantly, if you want further details, there are really good overviews of each of the options we're considering on haveyoursay.guelph.ca. Moving on, again, the voting methods, benefits and drawbacks. There are many benefits and drawbacks in each of these categories. Vote by mail gives the option for voters to cast a ballot without attending a physical voting location, which can be beneficial for persons with disabilities or for those with allergies or anything to that effect. However, it does take some time. A logistical challenge is it takes time to register to receive a mail ballot, have it mailed to you, and then have time for you to return it back to us so that it can be properly tabulated. Again, not to go into a lot of in-depth information here because those benefits and drawbacks from a very high level are also provided again on haveyoursay.guelph.ca. We did want to talk about costs. Cost really is just one of the factors that we will consider. It is not the only factor. It is by no means the most important factor, but it is one of the factors that we consider when we evaluate and make recommendations to council. When we do that, we combine the cost factors with things like community feedback, security, integrity of the voting process, and ability for voters to access and use the method. Again, we've put some high-level details on haveyoursay.guelph.ca. The important thing I would note here is we wanted to highlight costs because the legislation that I mentioned that is currently before the legislature originally contemplated the option for Guelph to consider ranked ballot voting. We had actually thought about having another panel just like this on the voting systems, first past the post versus ranked balloting. But because the legislation has moved fairly quickly through the legislature, and it's likely that ranked ballot voting will not be an option for Ontario municipalities in 2022, we did not offer that panel. That being said, that legislation that was in place before required us to consider costs of a ranked ballot election. And so really, we wanted to provide anticipated costs for running and assessing both voting systems, being first past the post or ranked ballot, but also the anticipated costs with voting methods, being vote by phone, vote by internet, or vote by mail. And so with that concludes my really brief introduction. I do want to say thank you to all of you that have joined us this evening. It really is incredibly important for us. And I'll stress again the place where you can share your thoughts after this evening and in fact download, for example, the content of this webinar at haveyoursay.guelph.ca. Please do share it with your neighbors. We want this to be a very vibrant discussion in the community, and we welcome that discussion. So thanks to our panelists who are also with us again, and I'm going to say thank you to Kelly at this point for moderating. I'm going to hand it back to Kelly right now to introduce the panelists, and over to you, Kelly.
Thank you. Before I introduce the panelists, I just wanted to go over a few things. We do have a few questions that we developed that we will be asking the panelists before we begin asking questions from those of you joining us tonight. I will ask a question and then I'll call in a few or all of the panelists to answer. Panelists, I might interrupt you from time to ask clarifying questions or to define something, or to make sure we provide opportunity for all panelists to have an opportunity to speak. If you have something to add or a question of another panelist, please let me know by raising your hand, either your real hand or a virtual hand if you wish. And if you've joined us from home to watch and take part, remember to submit your questions using Mentimeter, menti.com, or Facebook. If you have questions for a specific panelist, please mention their name along with the question, or you can let us know the question is for anyone on the panel. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our 4 panelists tonight. Dr. Alexander Essex is an associate professor of software engineering at Western University and an expert in the cybersecurity of elections. He co-authored a cybersecurity study of online voting use in the 2018 Ontario municipal election and is working with Dr. Goodman toward the development of cybersecurity standards for online voting. Dr. Nicole Goodman is an associate professor at Brock University, where she holds the Chancellor's Chair for Research Excellence. Dr. Goodman is an internationally recognized expert on electoral modernization. She has co-authored reports for election management bodies and governments across Canada and has provided advice to governments internationally about the modernization of elections. Dr. Goodman has led a number of projects studying elections in municipalities and First Nations across Canada. She currently represents Canada on the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance Board of Advisors. Sarah Qureshi is the president and CEO of QSI Security, currently serving clients across the US and Canada. Sarah is a thought leader in the information security or InfoSec industry, serving as a board member, helping several organizations adopt technological advancements in privacy and security. In the past, Sarah has assisted other municipal governments assess the security of their digital online voting systems to mitigate cybersecurity risks proactively. And we have Lorelei Root. Lorelei is a digital accessibility specialist who works in video game development, making games more accessible to people with disabilities. She is a member of the City of Guelph's Accessibility Advisory Committee, and as a member of the community who lives with disability, she is very passionate about this topic. So that is all of our panelists this evening. I'm going to start asking some questions of you all. And the first one, just to get us rolling, I'm wondering if you can share with us what most interests you about voting methods, what got you involved with this topic. And maybe, because I can see your face right now, Alex, if you could perhaps start us off.
Thanks, Kelly. Well, I got into elections in my my early graduate days. I have family and friends who have grown up in countries, and I've lived in countries where when democracy went away, bad things happened in the 20th century. And so that was something that is, I guess, sort of shaped kind of some of the family folklore. And it has been something that has sort of been a important part of, I guess, my family history. And so when I kind of had the opportunity to be involved in a field of research that was focused on keeping democracy running, especially in the face of all of these challenges, I really connected with that.
I was using the wrong mouse to unmute myself. So I'm going to have to try not to do that very often tonight. Lorelei, could you please help us understand what most interests you about voting methods and what got you involved in this topic.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kelly. I have been very passionate about this topic for years. I've been involved in this conversation specifically with the city for a number of years as well. And I come at it from a number of different angles with a variety of perspectives and experiences that I think are relevant. As you mentioned, I'm a digital accessibility specialist, so my career is based around making things more accessible to people with disabilities, specifically in digital spaces. So from a technical standpoint and from a software engineering standpoint, I understand the conversation at hand. I understand the technical jargon and the implications of what I'm asking for. I understand the risks associated, and I understand whether or not it's possible to implement in a safe enough way. But more than that, even, I think, is what I bring to the conversation in terms of my lived experience as a disabled woman who lives in Guelph and who used the online accessible voting option in the 2014 municipal election. And then in 2017, 2018, I experienced the removal of online voting, which was honestly a big barrier to my ability to exercise my franchise. The way that I came involved in the conversation with the city is that in 2014, I had a massive ischemic stroke, which introduced a number of new physical and cognitive challenges into my life. I couldn't speak, I became paralyzed. It was a really difficult time. And in a matter of seconds, my world kind of shrank down to the size of my bedroom. And there were very few things I could do on my own. Honestly, there were very few things I could do with assistance. But one area that my world didn't have to shrink was online. And one of the ways that it didn't shrink was that I was still able to vote. I've come a long way since then from recovery from my stroke, but I do also have multiple sclerosis. And the type of MS that I have is very predictable in that I don't know in what order or at what times different disabilities are going to show up in my life, and I don't know what disabilities are going to show up specifically, but I do know that anything that's controlled by my central nervous system, which is like everything, could eventually stop functioning the way that I'm used to, and I do know that it's going to continue to progress. There's no cure, and there's no way to undo damage that's been done by my multiple sclerosis. So looking at a future like that, I'm even more passionate and just so interested in helping build a future in which people with disabilities have equal access to everything, but definitely voting. I want to make sure that nobody is denied the opportunity to be heard. So that's what interests me about this.
Thank you so much, Lorelei. Sarah, I'm wondering if you could also tell us a bit about what interests you about this topic and what got you involved.
Absolutely. Firstly, I am so sorry to hear, Lorelei, all the things that you've gone through. My heart goes out to you, and I hope you feel better. I hope things only improve for you, even with technological advancements. So from security perspective, I am interested in, by default, all technology that involves any aspect of confidentiality, integrity, availability, but more so than just looking at the existing systems. For the last 3 years, the hacking community, the DEF CON community in particular, has been very focused on taking these voting systems and machines apart to see how insecure they truly are. There is a little bit of a challenging relationship between the vendors that develop these technologies and the InfoSec industry. We offer to help, and these vendors are keeping these technologies very close to their heart. They don't want hackers to get their first hands on it. However, these machines were available for hackers to just buy them off the internet, buy them off eBay, and then take them apart and say, here's all that's wrong with these machines, and here's how many different ways outside parties, adversaries, remote hackers can actually get into it. So there goes the integrity of the election system if we entirely rely on technology as it stands today. So there's where my interest lies in this topic.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'm going to ask the same question of you, Nicole, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Kelly. Lorelei, I just wanted to start by saying that I was so touched by what you said. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your experience, because I think that really encapsulates for people the challenges that some people face when they have to go to a polling station, and not everybody has the same access. And so it's really important to remember, and I hope to further make this point tonight, that we need to have structures in place to ensure that those people that face additional barriers when casting a ballot, that they can have as equal access as possible. So I just want to say my heart goes out to you. No idea what you've gone through, but I actually have been recovering for 1.5 years from a brain injury, and I was in a wheelchair and cane and went through all of that. And so my access was limited for a short period of time, but I have a greater appreciation now for, the barriers that people face. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and being vulnerable. Kelly, my interest really came from believing that people's voices are important, that, everyone's voice matters and voices need to be heard. And elections and voting in elections is actually the simplest way that you can exert your voice in a democratic system. And so my sort of passion for political and public participation motivated me to dig deeper into elections and voting, which then spiraled into a PhD, and here I am. Thank you.
Thank you. I am really touched by all of your commitments to democracy and to voting and to elections. It is wonderful to hear. I share it with you. The next question we have is about opportunities or limitations of the methods. So the question is, what opportunities or limitations do you see for remote voting options? Are there things that we can do to help leverage opportunities or to address these limitations? And maybe, Nicole, would you like to just keep on talking and we can hear from you about this question?
Sure. So I jotted some notes down. In terms of opportunities, while the pandemic has created a lot of problems, it has actually presented us with a lot of opportunities. And I think that this is an opportunity to really develop a robust remote voting plan, which doesn't necessarily just have to include online voting, but it should include a number of methods. So I don't just think mail voting, but a host of methods that really offer fulsome accessibility, as full as is possible. I think this is also a great opportunity for the city of Guelph. And, my advice goes to all governments in Canada, local, provincial, federal, to build their technical capacity. Different governments have different resources, but this is a great time to realize that, look, through this pandemic, we've become so much more dependent on technology, and we need to make sure that we have the resources, the technical capacity, the infrastructure to be able to support situations like this. If one were to arise in the future, situations where there might be climate change, or even at the local level, inclement weather, different types of events. So this is a great opportunity to be proactive and start to build those things now. In addition to that, it's a great opportunity to talk to stakeholders, which, the city is doing tonight through this event. So that is fantastic. But to reach out to stakeholders to formulate a comprehensive plan that targets all groups of voters, especially those often left behind through traditional models. In terms of limitations, I'll keep it to 3. One is that there are no standards currently around online voting. I'm sure my colleague, Dr. Essex, will comment on this. But, this is a huge problem, because we need to make sure that if we're implementing voting methods, which are clearly needed, that we have protections in place that, are not foolproof, and they're not going to always make sure everything is okay, but it's better than having nothing in place, right? Capacity. I think it's really important for governments to work with scholars and experts to share knowledge and advice to get the best plan possible and have as many resources as possible. And then a big limitation, a hurdle that the city will have to overcome, is digital literacy and access. And obviously this affects every community differently, but it certainly does affect Guelph as well. And so there's a number of strategies that could be implemented to address that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm wondering if you, Sarah, would like to comment on Nicole's take on the limitations and opportunities.
Absolutely. So that was a very comprehensive response from Nicole. One thing that I would like to add to is that not everybody is going to jump at the opportunity to do online voting as easily without the awareness that needs to go with it. So the young folks would be looking for things that will go right on the mobile phones, but where the elderly are so scared of technology at times that you cannot make that as their only way to vote. So you have to be very careful that if you are going to go in the direction where majority of the votes are going to come from digital resources, you have to make sure everybody is able to actually get to that as their option to exercise. So one of the things Nicole said is digital literacy, and this is where I would just say twice as hard. Make sure that you think of the youngest voter to the eldest voter, that they all can easily interact with the technologies you implement or you consider implementing.
Thanks very much. I saw a lot of nodding when Dr. Goodman brought up digital literacy. Alex or Lorelei, would you, either of you, like to add anything?
Yeah, I do think that digital literacy is important to keep in mind. I think that online, specifically online voting, is to me one of the most accessible remote voting options, and it's the one that I'm the most passionate about. But it doesn't have to be the only way that people vote. Like, it doesn't have to be the only thing. I think when we're looking to increase accessibility in any area, right, the most important thing to remember is that there's no one answer, there's no one implementation that will make something accessible to everyone. There's the key to making something accessible is to offer as many options as possible, because no two people with disabilities, no two people of different age groups, or even the same age group, no two people are going to have the same limitations, the same challenges, and the same barriers as one another. My younger sister and I both have the same form of MS, and we both find completely different things to be more accessible or less accessible. So it's important to always push for the most options possible, not to say, hey, look, we put a ramp there, now this is accessible. We need to have just a galaxy of implementations that are options that people can pick and choose from. This works for me, that one doesn't, and that works for me, and this does, but I'm going to disregard that. So that's going to be very important, as well as literacy, is just allowing people to have these options. And one of the reasons that I find online voting to be the most accessible of these options is because it's not really just one singular solution. Like, mail-in voting addresses the problem of mobility, maybe, and people who aren't able to physically leave their homes. But that's a very small minority within the minority of folks with disabilities, right, that solves a problem for. Whereas with computers, there are so many applications and so many different ways that we can make a user experience with a computer more accessible. So if someone can't read, there are screen readers that can read the ballot to them. If someone can't hear, there can be subtitles on anything on a computer. I personally play video games with my feet. I have a friend who can't move below his neck, and he uses an eye tracker mouse and just uses his eyes on his computer. So there are so many different solutions offered when we allow things to move online.
Thank you very much. Alex, I'm wondering if you want to either comment about making sure we have a variety of options, or if you'd like to bring up any other opportunities or limitations that you see for remote voting options, and anything that we might do to address those.
Well, you know, when it comes down to questions of the sort of democratic questions, you know, did my vote count? Is the result correct? Is my vote secret? And so forth. Those questions can be really hard to answer, and it tends to be the case that in light of those questions, voting technology tends to be a little bit more on the kind of conservative side. obviously that stands in tension and in contrast to accessibility needs. It doesn't have to, but it often does. So looking for innovation in this space is certainly a worthwhile pursuit. We just have to make sure that we are seeking that innovation, seeking that access through new technologies in a way that still, provides those democratic guarantees, the democratic principles that we're required to provide. And not just anything will achieve that. Now, that's not to say that online voting can't be done. I'm not saying that at all. But what we can't be doing is just doing whatever, because then we start to run into trouble. From a democratic perspective, obviously, again, accessibility is a separate issue, and I'm not an expert in accessibility, and I will leave that to Lorelei to sort of educate us about. But the main limitation with regard to online voting is that we don't know how to do it in a way that provides that democratic assurance that we have in sort of the maybe more conventional approaches. I mean, these other methods are sort of mature, and we have a good handle on what the legal challenges look like, what circumstances happen when there are challenges that are made. How do we handle that? How do we convince people that their vote counted? We have a better handle on that. But when we go into sort of an online space, we can run into trouble where not all online systems are created equal. But based on what we have seen in Ontario, there tends to be a case that there's sort of like a tendency to take the traditional way of building a website and just apply it to the voting case. But it's a very different problem, and it needs different solutions. So I guess maybe that's where our opportunity lies. I think online voting is possible in a manner that respects the democratic principles that we're legally required to respect. But it's going to take more than what we have right now, or more than what we're seeing.
Thanks very much. Our next question is about misconceptions. So I think I'm going to ask all of you this question again. We're doing really well for time. We're being able to, I think we might get through all of these questions by asking each and every one of you so far. The question is, are there any common, or maybe not so common, misconceptions that you've come across that you'd like to address? And Dr. Goodman, I would like to start with you again.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, I'm going to do some myth busting tonight here on this panel. So I've thought about a few myths, and actually Sarah highlighted 2 of them, so this is great. So myth number 1, that young people will vote online. So I want to make it very clear to everyone that the research shows, this is in Canada and other countries, that young people are least likely to vote online of any age group. And they are often, in the case of Ontario and the studies that I've done, often less satisfied with online voting than older age groups. Young people actually prefer to vote by paper for the most part. And these findings have been replicated in Canada, in Norway, in the Netherlands. And why we think this is because many young people, and when I say a young person, I'm thinking age 18 to 24, 18 to 30, 34. Oftentimes, at least in that 18 to 24 group, it's one of their first voting times or early opportunities to vote. And so they're casting a ballot for maybe the first or the second time. And it's like a rite of passage for them. It's symbolic. So they enjoy actually getting that physical experience. I'm generalizing, but this is for a lot of young people. Second myth, that older voters won't use it. Older voters are actually the biggest users of online voting. They report the highest satisfaction rates. And actually digital literacy, although it is a barrier, and I'm not downplaying that, but a lot of older voters who report lower levels of digital literacy, they don't interpret or report that as being a barrier to their accessibility, which is interesting. Next myth, that it has no effect on turnout. So my research has shown, particularly in the context of Ontario municipalities, that it does impact turnout positively by 3.5 percentage points. So this is not a totally modest increase. It's actually a bit higher than we see from voting by mail when elections go to full voting by mail. And then what we found is that in municipalities, if voting by mail was not in place beforehand, the increase was 7 percentage points, which is quite sizable. It's actually bigger than has been found in research when we changed the electoral system. That's research with Dr. Leah Stokes, if anyone's interested in looking it up. And then one final myth, not to take up too much time, is that online voting will solve problems of access for everyone. So while it can help with some groups, it can actually exacerbate issues with other groups. And some of my research has found that some people in some circumstances, when paper voting was eliminated and elections went all online, which has happened in Ontario municipalities, that some people were what we call digitally disenfranchised, and they were removed from the voting pool because they didn't have the options. So those are 4 myths that I wanted to bust, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much. Sarah, I see you nodding a lot when you're listening to Nicole. Do you have any other misconceptions that you'd like to share with everyone?
So a misconception, it wouldn't be a comment on what Nicole said. I'm very happy to hear about what the research is finding, that younger voters would want to actually go inside a polling station and exercise their right in that fashion. That's pretty awesome to learn. What I would say is I wouldn't call it a myth, nor would I call it busting a myth at this point. There are a lot of disintegrated technologies trying to work together to create an online version of voting. So what I would say is, just like any other system, InfoSec is catching up still. We are still making amends with how things are implemented by IT without taking security as an integrated part of building something. And it's not unique to see these issues in the voting systems. It's not unique to find that when hackers get their hands on a voting machine or counting machines, tabular machines, so on and so forth, they find a lot of vulnerabilities. They do, because that is very much like any other technology, any other sector that you would pick. So if you pick manufacturing, if you pick aviation, you pick rail systems, just randomly pick any system, any fully integrated system, you're going to find a lot of holes that need to be, basically, we need to consider a lot of security controls that need to work together and put in place, and then give some assurance that there is a verifiable process, that this is now a secure system. But in the security world, you're never going to hear somebody say this is now fully secure, not even in the military grade. You just lock things down and stop all controls and restrict access. And in voting systems, what you want to do is you want to make it more accessible and evenly available to the voters, so they can pick and choose which is their way of voting. So there's a little bit of a contradiction. In one way, we can say that now everybody's going to be able to do online banking, but we can't force it. If people want to still walk into a bank and say, I want to deposit this check or pay my bill, you should still allow people to do that, because that is their right to do. And that's a sector. Banking cannot just shut down itself and say, no, we're not going to deal with the customer that doesn't use online banking.
Thanks very much. I think you stopped. You were freezing a little bit there, but we could still hear you the whole time. But I just wanted to make sure that you were finished. Alex, I'm wondering if you have any misconceptions that haven't been shared by Nicole or Sarah that you'd like to share with us.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I've done a lot of work, a lot of research in Ontario about online voting, and internationally, and I've talked to a lot of municipal clerks and council candidates and former mayors and election officials about this, and I'm sort of kind of around this space a lot. And I would say that for me, the biggest misconception is touching on this idea of online voting, kind of being like online banking. I guess if there was one thing I could kind of get people to think about, take away from this evening, is that these are really fundamentally different challenges for like several really important reasons. So, one thing, there's no secrecy between the client and the bank. So the bank knows how you spend your money. They know where you get your money from. They know how much. They know when. Right? In elections, we have a ballot secrecy requirement. So the arbiter or the broker of your ballot isn't supposed to know how you voted. So if you asked a bank to function like an election, they couldn't, at least not in the way they do today. They couldn't process your payments without even knowing what they are. Maybe there's some blockchain solution to that, but blockchains have their own problems. So I won't go down that rabbit hole. In banking, fraud is the cost of doing business. So I saw a report recently that almost 3% of banking revenues are just lost to fraud. Right? And so that's just, they absorb that cost because they make so much money in other ways that it's acceptable. But in an election, 3% of fraud is not acceptable. I mean, it's 3% of, if 3% of the ballots were flipped, but you didn't know which 3% it was, I mean, it might change the outcome of an election, especially in a close race. Like, I mean, look at the United States. Okay. Banks also use sophisticated monitoring methods. I had my credit card called me up the other day, and they said they had to cancel my card because someone tried to reset my PIN, but their voice recognition software determined that the person on the phone wasn't me. So, I can tell you for a fact that none of the Ontario municipalities used sophisticated voice recognition for the phone voting. Improper charges can be detected and disputed. I mean, like, everyone's had a package stolen off of their porch. Everyone's had some kind of charge that shouldn't have gone on their card. And you can call up your bank and you can call up Amazon and say, hey, this package is broken, it got stolen, the charge is incorrect, please fix it. And they will, because A, you can detect it, and B, they can go and find the thing that's wrong and reverse it. So how do you know that your vote counted, and how do you determine if it was switched, and then how do they go and correct it in a voting context? Also in banking, the remuneration is like the remedy. So when something goes wrong, we just give you your money back. When somebody hacks our database at Home Depot, this happened a while back, they just give everyone credit monitoring, right? They give you something. They give you $5 off the next purchase to make it better. So if there's fraud or hacking that occurs in voting, how do you make it better? Right? Are you going to give me a $10 card if my vote gets stolen? Or I heard somebody say, well, why don't you let me be exempt from a bylaw for a year? So there are different ways to make things better when things go wrong. We don't know how to make things better when an election gets stolen. Like Guelph has experienced election fraud, and it was, by all accounts, kind of something that lives in the collective memory of the city even to this day. And then lastly, banks are heavily regulated. Online voting is not regulated, basically at all. If you look at the Municipal Elections Act, they don't even mention online voting. The words online and internet don't even appear in that document. And there are no standards. And in many cases, we see cities going to vendors and asking them what they think about cybersecurity and just taking the vendor's word for it and not consulting anything else. So what we need to do is form some kind of like clearinghouse of knowledge, a concentration of knowledge. They have this in the United States. We don't have this in Canada. So we have to be careful making the comparison that online voting and online banking or shopping are somehow the same. They really are. So.
Thank you, Alex. I feel like Sarah might not have been saying that it's the same, just that, that it's just a metaphor for having choice in what we do. But I'm wondering,
I'm not disagreeing with Sarah. I've seen this repeated in councils, many councilors, in the press. I hear it like every day. I hear this term, online voting. I can bank online. Why can't I shop online? I'm not disagreeing with Sarah.
Okay. But I'm going to go a little off script here because it's not in the questions we sent. But Sarah, I was looking on your LinkedIn profile, and I noticed that you were making a comment or something about biometrics. And then Alex mentioned how they noticed his card was used wrong because of voice recognition. I'm just wondering if you might, unless you wanted to tell us about future developments later, but if you might want to comment a little bit about biometrics in voting, because I did notice that in your profile.
Right. So I won't take the time to respond to what Alex said. A lot of it is the truth. I did not make a direct comparison between online banking and online voting, but I will talk about biometrics because that's the question you asked me. I am dead against use of biometrics as the way to authenticate your identity, because once your fingerprint's stolen, what are you going to do? That's number one. Once your retina patterns is stored somewhere, a very nice picture, high-res picture of you can be used to replicate that as a way to authenticate you. So in isolation, it doesn't work. I'm of the opinion that leave biometrics out of it completely if it was up to me.
I might have lost you. I don't even know if she can hear us, but if we want to move on to Lorelei, do you have any comments about common misconceptions that you might have come across that you would like to address or that you think we should all know?
Yeah, definitely. I delegated in front of City Hall in front of City Council in 2017 when they were first considering removing online voting as an accessible remote voting option. And I think there were a few misconceptions that happened even that night in front of me that were part of why it ended up being removed as an option. So I'd love to address some of those. And a couple of them were brought up by Alex earlier. I think there's a big misconception around the actual likelihood of voter fraud and a misconception around whether or not online voting is any more risky than other forms of voting. Because as much as we would love to believe that our vote is completely secure and that going to a ballot box is completely an infallible form of voting, it's not. Voter fraud voting fraud in an election is unfortunately a reality in every form of voting, remote voting or ballot box voting. And it's the job of the city in the municipal election, and I believe the clerk's office does a phenomenal job of this and has demonstrated this over the years with great research and great addressing every single concern that's been brought up. It's the city's job to mitigate those risks as best we can without disenfranchising an entire group of people who are already a very marginalized group, such as folks with disabilities or folks who are older, or there are people who still need to have a chance to vote. And I think it's very easy to sensationalize and become afraid of the risks of voter fraud happening online because we're like, oh no, hackers, oh. And of course it's a realistic, it is something that could happen, but it's not as though online voting is something new and some novel idea. In 2014, when we implemented it in Guelph, we joined like 100 municipalities who were already successfully offering online voting as an option. So, and then you look at even other democratic countries throughout the world, and military options to vote have been done online since like 2005 or 2006 in the United States. And there are ways to do this that are not massively risky. But with anything with technology, of course there is a risk. I can't deny that there's a risk. Someone could hack into my security system at home. Someone could hack into my bank account. It's not exactly the same thing. Which is why a comparison of a 3% fraud being part of the cost of doing business in a bank doesn't really translate to this situation, in my opinion, because the elections fraud is also a part of doing an election. So that's a big misconception. And the other big one that if I could have a minute to talk about that came up a lot in 2017 was the idea that a lot of counselors brought up the concern that allowing online voting would segregate disabled people somehow. that we should instead work on making the world more accessible rather than having people with disabilities be shut in and have the accessible option be at home. And while I can fully support the first half of that sentiment, the second half of it is problematic and honestly kind of offensive because no matter how accessible we strive to make the outside world, there will always still be some people who are unable to leave their homes. Accessibility isn't just a matter of like ramps and elevators and mobility buses, right? It's so much more complex and multifaceted than that. And while I do think that Guelph could go a long way to improve the public accessibility, and I work toward that all the time, I think it's a much bigger issue than that, and that can't ever come at the cost of accessibility to people who can't access public spaces. There are many people with disabilities who would never be able to come to a physical ballot box no matter what changes we make, and that's okay. Like, it's not our place to tell those people that they can't have accessibility in their own homes or that they should have the goal of leaving the house. Like, my disability, for example, isn't something for anyone to tell me to overcome. It's a part of my identity. It's a part of our city's diversity. We should view this as an opportunity to improve accessibility at ballot boxes for sure, and to offer other options as well, but not to take away the option for people to do things at home with the concern that it might segregate. So those are two common misconceptions I've heard around this topic, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to that.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we did. Our next question is about various elections that have happened. You just talked about that, you know, in the history of elections, that there's many municipalities that have been doing this. Well, you said it wasn't new, and then you mentioned about 2006. And I was like, wasn't that just yesterday? But I think maybe that's just because I'm getting a little older. So the next question, it's a bit of a long one, so I can repeat it if need be. We've seen various election events delivered across Canada over the last few months. Provincial elections in BC and Saskatchewan, general municipal elections in Regina, Saskatoon, and across Nova Scotia, municipal by-elections in Cambridge and Ottawa. What has your impression been of these events and the voting methods they've deployed? If any of you have had the opportunity to review how they delivered election services. And maybe I will start with you this time, Alex.
So the bulk of my research has focused on Ontario municipalities. You know, when I was at that council night in 2017, the mayor asked me why I hadn't come out in 2013 to the council, and I said because I had been a professor for 5 minutes at that point. So some of those earlier elections I kind of wasn't involved in, but certainly, you know, the online voting that's been happening sort of, you know, henceforth has been something that we've been looking at. And so the main sort of users of online voting in Canada right now are so Northwest Territories just did it last October as a absentee voting option. Nova Scotia just this past month has done it, and then Ontario in the municipal elections. So those are kind of like the main users at this point. Of course, Quebec is looking at it, and PEI had a plebiscite on this question, and New Brunswick had a citizen panel on it a little while back, and in 2016, they were looking at it federally, not really, but sort of a little bit. So it's certainly been something that's been a big deal. Where we have seen some allegations of fraud have been at the party level. So out in Alberta, there was some allegations about the leadership race in the United Conservative Party, and there is a criminal investigation that's kind of going on into that, and I've been following that case a little bit closely, and there's, you know, it comes down to the sort of the remote nature of some of the voting. Now, just to kind of get back to this idea about you know, the likelihood of fraud, we haven't really seen any concrete cases of fraud. I've received anecdotal case accounts from, you know, candidates of individual instances of fraud between family members. One family member taking a credential for another. This is a sort of a remote voting reality, but we haven't seen sort of the big evidence of widespread fraud. But there is a place where there are widespread allegations of fraud, whether or not they're justified or not. But there is a place that is currently tearing itself apart over fraud allegations, and that is the United States. I was in the New York Times with a bunch of colleagues trying to get them to tone down some of the rhetoric on Monday. I was in the National Post yesterday trying to respond to some of the president's allegations. Lorelei made the point about it being easy to sensationalize the risks of online voting. I mean, I agree with that. And I think what we can point to is the fact that, we are seeing a sensationalization of risks of conventional voting in the United States right now. The difference is they do have a paper ballot trail that they can return to, a sort of a ground truth of who voted for whom that they can recount. And in principle, it's possible that you could have something like that in Ontario with online voting. There's at least one vendor in Ontario that's working on something called cryptographic end-to-end verifiability for online voting. That would produce an evidence trail. But the online voting that we've been using, starting with the first municipality to use it back in 2003 all the way up to now, does not offer that. So the issue is what happens when somebody declares they think that they won and they don't want to concede, and there is no ground truth that you can return to and do a recount of. There's no physical sort of trail. And what if the company that's running the election is at the center of the allegations? We don't believe that this company counted it up correctly. I mean, these are conspiracy theories. I mean, I agree, they're awful, but they are tearing the United States apart right now. I mean, there's millions of people in the US that think that Dominion voting system stole their election, to the degree that Elections Canada yesterday had to tweet that they don't use Dominion. And then the president retweeted Elections Canada. So I don't think that, I think that casting this as accessibility versus security, I don't like this framing. I'd like to try to see if we can get away from this framing, because I think that we can really have both. But what we're doing right now, definitely in Ontario and in Canada with online voting, does not deal with the evidence side. And we've gotten away with it so far. But we live in a different world starting this week where that's not going to be something that we're going to be able to get away with. So we need to look at other approaches. And these municipalities and these votes that have happened in the past should not be our guide, should not be the guidance for how to move forward. I mean, we do have other ways that we can go. So we need to look forward more than backward at this point.
I like the idea of looking forward. I'm wondering if Lorelei, Sarah, or Nicole would like to comment on those recent Canadian elections. Or you're like, no, I want to talk about the States.
I have some general comments and advice for Guelph, but responding to Alex. So whenever you think it's appropriate, let me know.
I think that will be okay. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll try and be brief here. So I think lots and lots of great comments raised by Lorelei and Sarah and Alex, and I see my job as presenting a way forward. So I just want to say that, you brought up all these elections that have been held. Well, while these elections are being held, International IDEA on their website cites that at least 73 countries around the world have been forced to postpone elections because we're in a global pandemic. These are elections at the subnational and national level, and so it's hugely problematic. So what should we be thinking about? The pandemic. Your clerk, Stephen O'Brien, mentioned in his initial presentation about allergies. And I would extend that even farther and talk about just immunity. There are many voters with compromised immunity, and that is a new subgroup of electors that clerks are going to need to be thinking about. If you look at recent studies that talk about this pandemic, so a recent study from Harvard University says that in the absence of a vaccine, or while it's being developed, going through trials, and necessary critical care capacity that we can expect to experience this intermittent social distancing up until 2022. The year of the Ontario municipal elections. So we need to be thinking about that as we're planning for elections. The point that Alex brought up about access versus security, it's unfortunate that these two are pitted against each other, but this is the classic online voting debate. Really, on one side you have accessibility, on the other side you have security. But there is a way forward. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So, I mean, I have many thoughts on this, but just very briefly, if you're someone who's very concerned about security, but you also care and are concerned about accessibility, and you should be, then, you know, one solution is to offer online voting to a specific group of electors, for example, those that face additional barriers, and then put in additional security protocols. So you're not offering it to everyone, but specific groups. Why this is exceptionally important, and I want to be really clear when I mention this, is that how we vote determines who votes, which determines who governs. So the voting methods that our administrators put in place effectively can be changed to manipulate electoral outcomes. There's lots of evidence of this. So it is crucial that the voting methods that are made available are enabling everyone to vote and not just the right people to vote, let's say. You know, another really important thing is turnout. We often see in these types of situations where there is a pandemic or some kind of tumultuous situation, such as looking at my notes here, going back in the US, not to talk about the US too much, but in the US's midterm elections during World War I and the midterm and presidential elections in mid-World War II, turnout was way down from previous elections. So I know that the Nova Scotia elections reported high turnout with their online voting, but typically, and 100 years ago there wasn't, or 50, 60 years ago there wasn't online voting. Typically when we see crises ongoing, we see low turnout. And so that's an important consideration. So takeaway points is that I definitely think that it's not one or the other, and there can be a balance. And I think this discussion about how we vote is so crucial because it determines who votes and then who is put in power. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I could see some body language, and I do see that. So we have about 4 minutes left for this part of the evening. I think I probably can stretch it to 6, and we have one more question to get to. So Sarah, I did see you put your hand up, so we can go to your comments, but then I'm going to go to the next question and give you all a very brief minute to answer that. And then we can see how much time we have to maybe make up in the second part of our questions. So go ahead, Sarah.
So that was a really powerful statement by Nicole. How you enable voting for people is there's an impact on who is going to vote and who is going to govern. And that's very, very important for us to actually take into consideration. One thing I would like to add at this point is, just like many examples on a global scale and even on the south of the border, we are going to see a lot more, I'm going to use the word evidence of fraud from smaller groups who are going to take part into more online voting, more of their voters choosing to vote online. This is not, again, not just Elections Canada or elections in North America or global elections issue. The thing is, when you introduce security into a system, you try to introduce it to a smaller group to see how it is that we can actually refine the process by giving it in the hands of a smaller group. Just take that as an example and turn that into a good case study or a bad case study, because we've seen enough of those right now. But that is a very valid way to see, okay, what is working for us and how do we expand it by improving it to by the time we're ready to give it to the larger group. That is how the security world, unfortunately, works. We create a technology, we give it to a small group of people, they all break it, take it apart, break it into pieces, or by giving it to people in combination with the process and procedure, we then see what needs to be refined. So I think that would be a very good way for us in Canada to exercise more of online voting by looking at other smaller municipalities to come on board and try these new ways of engaging with the voters' audience by actually giving them the online voting option.
Thanks so much. So we do have like maybe 2 minutes for this next question. And that is, are there any future developments that we should be aware of? So we're here, I think we're kind of moving into this territory in the answers that I was just hearing, but maybe I could have a show of hands if anybody would like to comment on any future developments that we should be aware of. All right, go ahead, Alex, and then Nicole. And if you could keep it brief, maybe to a minute, that would be super.
Yeah, so cryptographic end-to-end verifiability, it's a way to give online voting a kind of public evidence trail that would somehow replace the paper ballot record that is used in sort of conventional voting systems. So this is sort of an advanced approach. There are vendors working on it right now. Microsoft is working on it. I've worked on it all throughout my graduate career. So this is one path forward for online voting that could provide the kind of accountability and evidence of a correct result that we have in sort of the conventional legacy systems.
Okay, you were very quick, and I am trying to keep us to time, but I do feel like I need you to say again what that was and a really brief explanation of it so that everyone at home can understand the whatever you just said.
Cryptographic end-to-end verifiability. It's a way to produce. It's kind of like, think of it as being like a mathematical proof, one that doesn't reveal how you voted, but provides evidence that your vote was counted. And it's it has certain aspects of it that need to sort of be made more understandable and more acceptable, psychologically acceptable to the public overall, or politically acceptable. But it is currently one of the only ways that we can get a similar evidentiary trail. Because, make no mistake, right now, if you do online voting in Ontario, the vendor produces a result, and you just have to trust the vendor. Okay, and if you're okay with that, then there's no problem. But a lot of people, and I dare say I'm questioning whether the law would when really held up under scrutiny, would support that sort of level of faith in the count and outcome of an election.
Thanks very much. And Nicole, you also had your hand up there.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to make a few points. So I'll be quick. Future developments, following the work that I'm doing with Dr. Essex on standards, we would welcome the opportunity to partner with the City of Guelph and work alongside them if they decide to implement online voting to ensure that they're able to benefit from this standards work. Be more than happy to do that. I want to say just a quick word on other voting methods, because we've talked a lot about online voting, but I know you folks are considering other voting methods. I just want to say that the surveys that I've done, when we ask people, we ask voters, and we ask them to compare all three remote voting methods, so online, mail, and telephone. They say that internet voting is their preferred voting method. This is by far. And when we actually see all three or all four voting methods, including paper voting, offered alongside one another, online voting is 98% of the time by far the preferred voting method. Voting by mail, a long-standing established voting method, has great benefits. Telephone voting is typically actually not used by very many people, and there's lots of problems, especially for older electors with the pound symbol. I don't know why, but that causes a lot of problems. So telephone voting hasn't been found to be a huge benefit. And then as a final word, I do have some slides for policy recommendations, but I'm going to be really brief here. My advice for the City of Guelph, if I could give it moving forward, would be that they want to focus on a blended approach for this election. So not just paper voting, but offering, a variety of remote voting methods so that you're ensuring that you're focusing on inclusion, enabling representation of voices, and trying to maximize electoral equality. And if anyone wants to ask a question in the Q&A, I have some great slides specifically about more nuanced policy recommendations for the city. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you for a good segue, just to let you know that we do have a survey right now. We are asking about all three methods of remote voting, and we are actually asking questions to your point about COVID and people's comfort in actually going to polls in person. So I would like everyone to remember to go to haveyoursay.guelph.ca and take our survey. And I'd also like to remind everyone that they can go to menti.com and enter a question for our panelists this evening. So that is menti.com, and the code is 4757931. We would really like to hear some questions. I do see we have some questions that have come in. I don't know if they're from Menti or from Facebook, but we do have some that have come in. And we're going to move into that set of questions, even though I did see some hand raised. Hopefully we can work in further comments when we address the questions that we're getting from the community. And we also had a final question in our little list of questions that we didn't get to, and maybe we can get to that in the second part as well. So again, I'm just going to remind everybody, menti.com with the code 4757931. And if you'd like to take the survey, to go to haveyoursay.guelph.ca. Okay, so I just have to take a look at these questions that we're getting. And this might take us back, dipping back into the United States, but maybe not. We'll see. The question that we got in was, I would like to hear from the panelists on how significant a threat they consider internet voting to be and defending against litigation from a candidate who challenges the validity of the result in court of law. And I can't imagine where that thought might have come from, but does anybody have any comments about that question that we've gotten? So I see Alex and Nicole. Oops, we'll start with you, Alex.
Well, I don't think it's a off-the-wall question at all. I actually think that this is precisely the question that we need to be asking. It is a question that we haven't been asking. Well, I mean, I've been asking it. Some of the cities I wish would, maybe kind of go back to the MEA principles and then ask how those principles are supported by the use of not just online voting, but the specific brand of online voting that was used in 2018 and 2014.
Would you mind letting everybody know what MEA principles are?
Oh, so the Municipal Elections Act, MEA, is the legislation that governs how elections are to be run in Ontario municipalities. Now, I'm obviously not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, but when you work in elections, you have to study the law, at least to the degree that you can identify if there's issues, right? So, the municipal elections are not covered under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so they might not have the same kind of level of protection that a provincial or territorial or federal election might have. But there are principles that have been established in law, in case law, that it's all the stuff you would think. One person, one vote. The vote should be accessible, right? The ballot is secret, and so forth. So there's many of these questions that I cannot square how what the online systems that I saw in 2018 are upholding some of those principles, right? So when I see what appears to be re-identifiable login credentials, like there's the ability for somebody to re-identify your identity next to your vote, I'm not sure how that squares up with the ballot secrecy principle. Now, in terms of challenging the result, in the United States, they're doing this right now. So in Georgia, they're challenging the result, and they have, the laws in Georgia are a little bit they're not as well constructed as they should be. Let's just be honest. But they do have risk limiting audits, which is a type of audit that goes on against a paper trail. And they do also have the ability to do manual recount. So they're basically recounting all of the ballots by hand right now. They're recounting all the ballots for the presidential race by hand. And Americans do not like to hand count, right? There's like a serious allergy to this idea. So this is a big deal for them, but they have the laws to allow access to that. So if you are disputing your loss in the election, it's like, okay, but here's the paper. And we recounted it, and it supports what the machines told us. So whether or not there's vulnerabilities and whatever, it's secondary. The paper says, right? So, but in an online system, you don't have paper, and you actually don't really have anything else to support it. So if somebody decides to challenge the validity of the election, and they can get past the initial test where a judge will allow that case to go forward, I don't know what defense the clerks and the vendors would have at their disposal to say beyond just that, like, you have to believe us that the election was exactly. So I think that there's a legal vulnerability there. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer. People that are more in tune with the law can study this issue, but it's not being studied, and it needs to get studied. And that's all I'm saying.
Okay, I do believe Nicole would like to comment to this question as well.
Yes, thank you. So I was just going to say, with respect to the Municipal Elections Act, so just so everyone understands, we have a system of multi-level governance here in Canada. And so the provinces actually write the legislation that governs municipal elections. So the province of Ontario writes the Elections Act, which determines whether the municipalities can use alternative voting methods. And then after that point, municipalities have relative autonomy to implement elections as they see fit. But in the Municipal Elections Act, not only is there nothing around online voting, but there's actually nothing around unsupervised voting. So it's all focused on supervised voting. So huge hole there. But with respect to litigation, I wanted to bring up a point. So Guelph used online voting in 2014. They also used tabulators. In 2018, when they decided not to use online voting, they continued to use tabulators. Now, well, you can run into, I'm sure Alex and Sarah can speak to this, but greater fraud issues with online voting. There can still be a lot of technical issues or perhaps allegations of fraud with tabulators. Particularly with some political party elections that I've studied. Tabulators actually were counting the ballots wrong. I mean, some of you will probably remember the 2000 US disaster. Even now what's going on in the United States. So I don't think we should just preclude this conversation to online voting. It needs to be extended to electronic voting, as a whole. And in addition to that, I mean, election fraud can happen with all kinds of voting methods. I remember being out in Nova Scotia and studying elections, and there was a guy who would run into the polling station naked every single year, and he would take boxes of ballots, as many as he could, and go and throw them into the water. And this was a huge thing, and the police were ready for this guy. This was in Cape Breton Regional Municipality. But I'm just saying that election fraud can happen. It's just, it can happen to a larger extent, right, if it's digital. But we need to be mindful of this conversation being broader than just online voting. Thanks.
Stephen, you'd like to say something? And then Lorelei.
Actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll defer to Lorelei, because I feel like she's, we invited her to the panel. I just had some comments about some of the nuances of municipal elections in the context of comparisons to, obviously the U.S. comparison is a completely wildly different beast, but even within national and subnational elections in Canada. So I'll defer to Lorelei. I'm happy if you come back to me, Kelly, but feel free to move through if you need to.
Lorelei, then.
I do hope we move back to that, though. But yeah, I was just going to bring up as well. I think Nicole made some good points. And also, I can't help but wonder about the litigation that could potentially come from Guelph not offering any accessible voting options, right? The Municipalities Act, the Municipal Elections Act does, outline accessibility guidelines. And I think that that's important to remember as well, that I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if there is any legal action that could be taken there as well, but I think we also run a risk of not offering any accessible voting options. So just a little brief thought there.
Thank you. Our next question from our people at home is actually about voting at the federal and provincial level. So it is, should the lack of standards for internet voting at the federal or provincial level present a concern for municipalities and residents? Oh. Okay, you can go ahead, Nicole. I think we've lost Sarah again a little bit. I hope we do get her back. So go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you to whoever asked that question. I'm sure Alex will, or Dr. Essex will chime in, but yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. So, you know, we've seen a lot of, Dr. Essex went through some of the uses, some of the, like at the municipal level and at the subnational level. You know, Elections Canada has been investigating online voting since 2007 or 2008, but there has been a lack of thought leadership in this area around standards. I mean, some of the work that Dr. Essex and I have done together has shown that, you know, Canada is the one country in the world that has more online voting use or more instances of online voting use than any other country in the world. And that's just by function of our population. But we have absolutely zero regulation. Meanwhile, a country like the United States has very prescriptive regulation around hardware, system hardware, such as even down, Dr. Essex can correct me if I'm wrong, but around the type of pen that can be used. So, you know, this is really an area where we need some work. So our plan to fix this, because we wrote multiple op-eds and got tired of just, you know, letting our voices go out there and not seeing any action, is we are working together. We are working with Adam Churchard, who is a PhD student at York. We're working with the CIO Strategy Council. We've put together a proposal, and our hope is to build standards out for Ontario as a case study. Try that out in advance of the 2022 RFPs coming out, and then build out a national model from that that would apply, you know, provincially and nationally. Because whoever asked the question is right. You know, we need to think about standards for these different levels of government as different, because there's different levels of risk with each of these different levels. And actually, if you poll voters, there's different perceptions about the importance of these types of elections. I often do an exercise with my students where I try and get them to sell me their votes. They are much more likely to sell me their, you know, university votes or municipal votes than they are higher levels of government, because for some reason they tend to attach a greater degree of importance. And so this is all important in the standards discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am noticing that we have a lot of questions and we're getting down to much less time. So I wanted to go to a question that is directed at Lorelei. A couple of people asked this actually, and it's about, I guess I'll read this one. I'd like to hear from Ms. Root on how to resolve the apparent conflict between accessibility and security. And I'm not sure you were saying that there was conflict, but if you'd like to comment to that question.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that that question came through, because I don't think there is conflict. I think Dr. Essex brought up that there seems to be a framework that we're discussing of accessibility versus security, and that he wanted to move away from that framework. And I would agree with Nicole that doesn't have to be the case. I don't believe that that is the case. I think there are ways to implement accessibility and online voting as an accessible option that don't put the vote at risk. I personally have been very, very passionate about politics and voting since I was like 10 years old. My grandpa was always on city council where he lives, and I've always been very, very passionate about this stuff. And to me, the sanctity of the vote is very important, and the integrity of the vote is very, very, very important. And I think we need to protect that. And I think that the vote, the results of an election should absolutely accurately reflect the voices of the people who live in that city. And I know that, you know, everyone here, everyone on this panel is concerned with upholding that integrity of the vote. But how accurate can those results be? Realistically, how accurate can those results be if we are disenfranchising such a large and growing portion of our population by not having an accessible voting option, right? Because let's be clear, folks with disabilities were a minority, but we're a very large portion of Guelph. According to Statistics Canada, 1.5 million Ontarians have disabilities, and that's almost 15% of the population. And it's estimated that 20% of the population will have disabilities in 2 decades. So, like, with those statistics in mind, that's 20,000 people in Guelph. So it is important that the vote be accurate, and it is important that it be secure. But I think, accessibility and security can go hand in hand. I think that the risks are being sensationalized. And I think that with my understanding, my full stack software development background, I can confidently say that one does not have to exclude the other. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for that answer. Another question. This is actually not something that we even have on our survey, so it'd be interesting to find the answer. Should one family member be able to cast a ballot on behalf of the other or all eligible voters in the household? And I see some head shaking, which is great, because then the person said, assuming your answer is no, how would you propose that be prevented when remote internet voting is allowed? Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
So you have to look at what the law says, and you're not supposed to do that under the law, except there are provisions where you can delegate votes in certain, I guess it depends on the municipality. So for example, in Toronto, they used to have a law that you could, you could vote on behalf of like up to, it was some ridiculous number, like 100 people or something. And they had to repeal that law because it's a proxy voting, because people will go around through apartment buildings and knock door to door and get people to sign over their franchise to one of these proxies to vote on their behalf. But there are situations where proxy voting is allowed. So that would be one kind of like legal way to vote on behalf of another person. But what we saw in Ontario 2018 with the online voting was and these were all anecdotal accounts. There was some there was some representation in the press about parents voting on behalf of their adult children at Oxford University. I heard anecdotal accounts. I talked to a council member who in Ontario City who told me a case about one of his supporters came to him and said, my husband voted using my credentials when I was away at work. And I came back and I was furious. And he said, well, why don't you report this to the authorities? And she said, I'm not going to send my husband to jail because he stole my vote. We also found that the login credentials for the online voting that were mailed to people's houses were see-through. So in our report, we got a photo of one of these credentials. You can hold it up to the light and see the panel. So unsupervised voting, so mail-in ballots have that issue as well. If you're like Washington State or Colorado, there's many states that only do mail-in voting, and that's just kind of the reality of unsupervised voting. Mail-in voting has that risk. Online voting has that risk. It's just that online voting has a lot more risks. It's like whatever mail-in voting has plus a bunch more is what online voting has. And I really don't think that the risks are sensationalized in the sense that we are actually starting to see them manifest. So like before the 2018 election, I was in the press saying, listen, you need to have a disaster plan if your online system goes down on election night. And there were clerks that said, well, I don't need a plan. Nothing's going to happen. Risks are sensationalized. And then on election night in 2018, 43 cities, it's like 1 million registered voters. The election sites went down, and they had to declare election night emergency. So, like, it's just this like abstract risk until the day it's not. And we have disaster plans for floods and fires and so forth. So we need to have them for this too. We need to know what we're going to do if the website goes down. And this happens all the time. I was testifying in New South Wales earlier this year because they had the same problem where the website went down on election night. So, these things happen. We have to plan for them. I don't think that they're, pie in the sky risks. They're manifesting. We're seeing, them happening, and the risks will get bigger. Like So anyway, I'll stop there.
All right, this next question I'm going to ask of Nicole, using the wrong mouse again. Where did it go? Have there been any formal initiatives for collaboration between municipalities to pool resources to develop and implement online or other remote voting systems?
That's a fantastic question. I actually think that's probably a question that is best answered by your clerk. I mean, I do know of some situations where municipalities, particularly smaller ones, have pooled resources, and there has been some information sharing. But I mean, many of these instances are not widely publicized. So I think Stephen might be better to answer this question.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. I think, you know, as Dr. Goodman alluded to, there's probably some examples of smaller municipalities sharing resources, and anything that I can share in that vein would be purely anecdotal. So I'm a little bit hesitant to go there. I mean, I know examples, and leading into the 2014 municipal election event here in Guelph, we partnered with a few municipalities to secure a third-party security vendor, InfoSec cybersecurity vendor, to sort of conduct. And Dr. Essex can, and probably Lorelei as well, can correct me on the proper terms, but basically threat and penetration style tests and attacks at the internet voting platform that we had in place leading into the 2014 election event. So that would be an example I would use. There has not been, and I think this is why we all are sort of looking eagerly towards the work of Dr. Goodman and Dr. Essex and others around standards and regulations and those kind of things, because I think more broadly, those are probably something that would be welcomed in the sector.
Thank you for that. Alex, excuse me, a question has come in for you. We'd like to hear from Dr. Essex on his best estimate of a reasonable timeline for implementing a satisfactory end-to-end encrypted system and creating regulations to verify it.
So the timeline to get regulations is something I have zero control over. I don't want to have to run for public office to get this fixed, because I don't think I should have to. I have told my colleagues, especially in the United States, that if we could get a national clearinghouse and thought leadership body in this area, something like the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, I would be happy if we could do that by the time I retire. That's what I'm shooting for, because the legislation grows at a snail's pace. We've been asking for updates to the Municipal Elections Act for years, and now all of a sudden we have legislation that's going to update the Municipal Elections Act, except it's to ban ranked choice voting for no good reason, as far as we can tell, and to move up the timelines for clerks and make their job harder. I mean, that's partisan politics. So we are asking for the Air Jordans for Christmas, and instead we're getting the cat tie. So I don't know when that's going to happen. That's a political thing. I'm a professor, not a politician. I don't want to have to get into the politics, but I don't see it happening on its own. Unless, of course, there's some big disaster, another kind of election night emergency like what we saw in 2018, but just bigger. In terms of the standards and in terms of cryptographic end-to-end verification, like I say, Microsoft is working on this. They have their Election Guard product. I visited Microsoft last year, and I know the people behind that. They're I think really good people, and Microsoft I think is invested in it. There's a company out of Kitchener called NewVote that is sort of, I guess, the first company in actually the world to really be seriously trying to integrate that into their products. So they'd be somebody to talk to. But this is going to take some time. And if we have to do internet voting, the not very well structured way. There certainly are things that we can do at least to make it better in the meantime. So one thing you could do is, have a, mandatory load testing on your web servers so that for a fact that, everyone logging in on election night is not going to bring it down. You don't have miscommunications about your bandwidth allowance like what actually happened in 2018. So those, there are, sort of guidance that we could, offer in that regard. But it's tricky because we say this stuff and I don't think people believe us until something goes wrong. But then they focus on the specific thing that went wrong and fixing that specific thing, when what we really need to do is have a comprehensive plan. So short answer, years to really sort of fix this. But there are things we can do right now today. I mean, if Guelph absolutely has to do online voting for 2022, there's a few things you could do to sort of lower your exposure. So
if I can jump in there, Kelly, too.
The clerk about that going forward if it comes to it.
Yeah, and if I could jump in there too. I mean, Dr. Essex, might aspire to be a legislator, but he's obviously a shoe fanatic. What's interesting is, and I quite agree with Dr. Essex's characterization of the length of time it takes for these changes to come through legislation. Earlier on, we were talking about principles under the Municipal Elections Act, the MEA. A lot of listeners on this panel would probably be interested to know that those principles aren't actually in the act itself. They're not actually explained in the act. They're articulated in case law and jurisprudence in the area, cases like Cusimano v. Toronto and DiBiase v. Vaughan, but they're not actually in the act. And that's something that we as a sector, my colleagues around the province and sort of as a professional association, we've been pushing that for that change to be included in the act for some time. Probably, I'm going to say, for the better part of 10 plus years. And so that it's just some contextual considerations that I thought I would provide for listeners and those that are watching.
Thank you, Stephen. So there's actually a message from Sarah in the chat that she needed to drop off, but she left us a question, and I'd like to be able to get to that one actually, and then go back into the questions that we're getting from our community. So Sarah's question is that she would love the city to be prepared with a plan to respond to if and when online disruptions or hacking question the integrity of elections. What would the city do in case malicious actors disrupt online voting?
I suppose that's for me.
Yeah, but also Nicole has raised her hand. So do you want to go first, or I'll let Nicole go first and then you can add on?
I was just going to add a follow-up to that because there's a lot of chatter about disrupting online voting, but what about the role of tabulators in potentially changing the results of elections? I mean, it did happen in the NDP leadership election. They tested 3 ballots in the tabulators with the company to show that they worked well, and 2 of the ballots were read incorrectly by the tabulators. So they had to go to an emergency hand count and call people in. Again, with tabulators, one of the big issues, you see all of these companies today that are collecting data. Data is going to be the new IP, the new oil, right? Data and intellectual property are really important. What about putting items into, the contracts that ensure that data that is collected through that tabulator remains the property of the local government and does not become the property of a private firm that could then later use that or try and sell it back to the municipality? I'm not trying to deflect from the question, but I'm just saying that oftentimes this discussion about malicious actors is targeted around the conversation of online voting. And I don't know if Guelph plans to use tabulators in 2022, but I know they did in 2018 when they made the decision not to use online voting. So I think tabulators needs to be part of this conversation too, because if Guelph says no to online voting and yes to tabulators, they're still opting for electronic voting. Thanks for letting me add that in, Kelly.
Maybe I can add in on that, Kelly. The sort of 2-part questions, and I think Dr. Goodman's really actually quite helpful to sort of bring up the conversation around tabulators. Generally, on the first part of the question, we would pursue it in any other way that there was a malicious action that occurred in an election event. We have the ability to pursue it through enforcement activities and penalties under the Act. That would involve us contacting local police services, which in my experience and having seen in other municipalities, it would then be generally speaking, handed off to the OPP as sort of a higher level policing jurisdiction to investigate those things. We could probably get into a lot of discussion about how some of those investigations have happened in other municipalities, but I'll leave it at that as a general statement because I don't want to sort of spend too much time on it. The tabulator piece and the data associated with tabulators is quite interesting. So without knowing the context of the NDP example that Dr. Goodman referenced and the full details of it, What I would say is the tabulars have become very beneficial for us in municipal elections because, again, I come back to the point I made earlier, the complexity and the nuanced difference between municipal elections in Ontario and other election events. When you go vote provincially or federally, I will, dare I say, and maybe my counterparts at senior levels of government would scoff at this a little bit, but our elections at the municipal level in Ontario and in other jurisdictions across Canada are infinitely more complex than the federal and provincial elections. When I go vote in Guelph and cast a ballot provincially, I'm picking one of 5, 6 names on a ballot, depending on how many candidates have registered, how many parties are registered in my riding, and that's it. When I go vote municipally, I'm electing a mayor. I'm selecting, in our current situation, one of 2 councillors per ward, so I can pick 2 names out of a potential 6, 7, 8, 9 candidates in a council contest, and I'm having to elect a school board trustee. And in some of those cases, I can elect more than one school board trustee in the same way I can elect more than one councillor in a ward system in Guelph. So we have composite ballots, and the tabulating equipment helps us immensely in tabulating that. It's not as simple as pulling one ballot out, reading the name, verifying where the mark is, and allowing scrutineers to view it and that kind of thing. Very important. We have the ability to do that with paper ballots and tabulators. The second thing I would say is, again, without knowing the NDP situation, we spend an awful lot of time with those tabulators testing. We put them through very rigorous logic and accuracy testing. And for those that are listening, I think it is important for me to express this. That involves us preparing a test deck that we run through each of the same test deck through each of the tabulators. That test deck is built with actual ballots that will be used in the election. So we're testing that they're actually marking the names correctly. And so those machines receive those test decks and they are tested, and then they are sealed and locked. So we confirm that the results we anticipate from that test deck are actually being verified by the tabulators, and then they're sealed and locked behind double locked doors here. And the other thing I would say is really important is they're never connected. So they're never connected aside from a power supply. And I'm sure Dr. Essex and maybe Lorelei could comment on if that poses a threat. I understand a traditional sort of power connection isn't going to pose a whole lot of threat, but they're never internet connected devices. They have memory cards in them. We pull out those memory cards and they are retained, to Dr. Goodman's point, by the municipality. We have those memory cards still, for example, from the 2018 election, along with, for a period of time, all the ballots from the 2018 election to do that verification. So in the case of the tabulars, really important for me to stress the importance of that and the rigor that we put into that level of testing and logic and accuracy testing of those machines.
All right, I have not much time left. I have about 3 minutes before we have to close, and I do have a question from Lorelei. I just wanted to let everybody know that questions that we can't get to tonight that can be answered by our clerk's office we'll be answering on haveyoursay.guelph.ca. So we'll add those questions in and we'll answer them in written form. So I just wanted to make sure that I can get as many questions to our panelists, because you guys are not necessarily at our disposal to do that later. So a question for Lorelei, and I think this came up because someone suggested it, potentially another panelist. Would you be comfortable with or accept a compromise where only those with accessibility or mobility issues had access to internet voting?
Okay, this is a complex question for me to address, because how do we decide who is disabled enough, right? We would then be requiring people, I assume, to self-identify as disabled, which is not necessarily in everyone's comfort zone. We would have to have some idea of who is disabled enough to be considered. You know, I use a wheelchair some days, I walk other days. Does somebody with low vision, but who can see, is that disabled enough? And that's very, very problematic territory to ever wade into. So whenever we're offering options only to folks with disabilities, we come up against this wall of we now have to pick and choose who we're saying is disabled enough. That's a problem to me. And because, again, it's not a black and white issue when it comes to whether or not someone is disabled, you know, whether or not someone has a disability. So as much as it would be great, I think with my understanding of technology and the way that things are tested, it is great if we can have a smaller pool first. But I don't know how we would implement that without kind of violating some human rights a little bit. And so that's where that becomes a little bit tricky. In a perfect world, it would be great if we could somehow have a smaller group of people be the ones who are able to access online voting as an option. But part of accessibility, like it's right there in the word, is access. Everyone needs to be able to access accessibility features, and nobody should be telling people who gets to use accessibility features, because it's such a personal and different and nuanced issue for everyone.
Thank you very much for that. I understand, Nicole, you might like to respond to that as well.
Yes, thanks, Kelly. I would just add really quickly, I think Lorelei sort of captured it beautifully, but this idea of varying abilities extends beyond physical, right? And there's persons with perhaps mental varying abilities that, may not be able to attend a polling station because of anxiety reasons, for example. But I think the game changer in the context of this pandemic too is persons with compromised immunity, or who could be more susceptible to this virus. And I would say that if the city does consider, making this option available to persons with varying abilities, that they would need to extend this to persons with compromised immunity in this current context. Thanks.
Okay, Lorelei, if you want to comment to that, and then I'm going to have to close out.
Yeah, sorry. Just absolutely people with varying levels of compromised immune system. That is someone who needs accessibility. Like, accessibility is not just for people who have what we see on TV as being considered a disability. There are people who are afraid to go in public spaces for a variety of reasons. There are so many different ways that accessibility benefits so many people, and absolutely people with suppressed or compromised immune systems should always be considered. Anyone who needs access to things should always be considered.
Thank you so much, all of you, and to Sarah, who probably can't even hear me saying thank you so much to her. I would like to have a call to action again and ask people to, especially people that have been so thoroughly informed as we were tonight, on all of the complexities of this issue, if they would please go to haveyoursay.guelph.ca and fill out the survey. If there's further questions, we even have a question and answer tool on there, so people can go in and ask questions. And there's a significant amount of questions that we couldn't get to tonight that we will be answering on haveyoursay.guelph.ca in the question and answer tool, so that people will, if they've asked a question and they would really like to see that answer, they can go there and check it out. We'll probably get to those Q&As tomorrow or the day after. It'll be quite soon. Also, as I mentioned, this event was recorded, or is being recorded, and that recording will be posted and will be available very soon as well, both on guelph.ca/voting and on haveyoursay.guelph.ca. So again, I would like to thank our panelists for sharing their valuable perspectives tonight. I think you've provided us all with a lot to think about. And a lot of us are quite happy to be able to go out and vote, and we'd like to continue to do that. And like I said before, we want to make sure that people are comfortable doing that they are able to do that, and that they can trust in their vote. So please do go and have your say and fill out the survey. And thanks to everyone else who joined us tonight. Thanks to all of you who wrote in your questions on Facebook and at Mentimeter, and thank you for joining us tonight. I don't know if you were going to say goodbye as well, Stephen, but
Sure.
I think that is everything from me.
Yeah, great. I will echo Kelly. Thanks so much to the panelists, Lorelei, Alex, Nicole, Sarah, who joined us as well. Very much appreciated. I think we created a big dialogue, which was the goal and is incredibly important in this project. We certainly want to hear people's input. I can't stress enough, but Kelly's mentioned the locations where you can give us feedback. We do really appreciate that and value it. It is open for another couple more weeks, so please do take the time to add your thoughts to the discussion. And we look forward to hearing those and bringing a report before council in the new year. And we look forward to serving residents and electors in Guelph about the election services. And so that's a really important thing that we do, and we take it very seriously. We've got a team of dedicated folks that are very passionate about delivering that service to Guelphites. So with that, I will turn it back to Kelly to sort of close us out, wrap us off, and say good night to everybody, and thanks for joining us.
That was so quick. We actually have 5 minutes to ask the 3 panelists that are remaining if you have any final thoughts or things that you would like people to take away before we sign off tonight. I think I will start with Nicole. So 1 minute.
When you ask that question, I'm thinking I'm going to come up with what I'm going to say as the others are answering. So I would just say, I think that online voting is probably the best structural solution that we have to increase participation. But there are a number of concerns that should be taken incredibly seriously, as has been raised in this discussion tonight. And so I think there's a way to go about and broach this responsibly. But again, my advice to the city of Guelph or any other municipality thinking about the 2022 election is to, offer a blended method, which means not going fully online. It means still offering the traditional paper ballots for those who want it, and potentially offering another remote voting option in addition to online, maybe mail voting, since telephone doesn't have great uptake or positive reviews. But a blended approach to maximize access and taking the security piece very seriously. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm really grateful to Stephen and Jennifer for the invitation to speak to you all today. Thanks.
We're so grateful to you as well. Lorelei, would you like to offer any parting comments?
Yeah, just I really also believe that online voting is something that can be implemented safely. I do think that it can be implemented in a secure enough way. I think that we have seen, as was brought up by other panelists, we have seen attempts at voter fraud, even in Guelph, like the 2011 robocall scandal, and that had nothing to do with online elections. So there are risks. And I really, really appreciate the very thorough research and work that has been done over the years repeatedly by the city clerks and the city of Guelph to mitigate those risks. And I think that we can be confident moving forward and offering an option that is accessible to everyone and, again, doesn't disenfranchise an entire very large portion of our population who are, again, already very marginalized. Thanks. And thank you, Kelly, for moderating, and thank you to my fellow panelists tonight. This has been great.
Thanks, Lorelei. And I think we can close out with you, Alex. So if you have any final thoughts for us, that would be super.
Thanks, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think you guys have a really excellent staff here, and I think that no matter what you guys decide on, you're going to be in good hands. I think a lot of the discussion that we're talking about, or at least that I'm talking about with some of this online voting stuff, it kind of transcends the Guelph conversation into sort of a national discussion, international discussion. So I just want to read you something here from our report as a Supreme Court of Canada quote that I think is relevant. Maintaining confidence in the electoral process is essential for our electoral system, which is a cornerstone of our democracy. If the electors lack confidence in the system, they will be discouraged from participating in a meaningful way. More importantly, they will lack faith in their elected representatives. Confidence in the process, therefore, is a pressing and substantial objective. Now, yes, fraud can happen with optical scanners, but you have paper. You might not have the laws to do risk limiting audits. We can fix that. We're going to need to fix that. And I think we have a lot to learn from how the United States has approached that. The United States, by the way, also has a lot of sophisticated thinking about something called ballot marking devices, which are a highly accessible device to deal with accessibility questions under the Help America Vote Act. But, you know, I'll just leave you with this. This is Chief Electoral Officer of Ontario. One last final quote. As the public becomes more informed about software, malware, the manipulation of technology data systems, like they have exploded of interest in the United States this week, an explosion of interest, rabid interest. They are increasingly interested to know how their technology preserves the integrity of the electoral process and personal information. So, you know, we have been going along a certain way and kind of getting away with it so far, but, you know, we really entered a new world. The whole COVID pandemic voting is, you know, we didn't honestly get enough time to even talk about that, but we're already 2 steps ahead of that right now with fraud claims in the US. And you know, when the US sneezes, Canada gets a cold. We're going to have to deal with this. You know, so the Chief Electoral Officer, you know, is saying it, the Supreme Court is saying it. Sooner or later, we'll have to confront the confidence in the results. Of course, the accessibility as well. And you know, hopefully, you know, Canada can move forward in Guelph, and we can all have the best elections in the world, because we already do have pretty awesome elections here. And, thank you.
All right, cheers to the best elections. All right, thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good night. Bye, everybody.